the highest quality way or some other compromise way of actually serving their customers is by using open source software and collaborating by others. Because simply, if you're a big company or if you're a small company, if you can sort of like build a certain software stack together rather than alone, that's often cheaper. And if you're like trying to talk to other people, there's typically no real commercial benefit of making your stack very unique, because then you can't talk to others anymore. So it's very sort of like cost effective to build the part where you talk to each other and have that part of the code, basically you build that together. And so that's what you see happening in the Apache Software Foundation, in the Apache world, that most people are simply there because it makes sense to build software together. And I think that's actually like one of the driving forces where you basically see open source being used in very large companies, in the government, in all sorts of places, that it just basically makes sense from a social and commercial perspective. Having said that, there is also a certain aesthetic beauty to it, sort of like a certain pleasure to basically be able to like see what very bright people have built and be able to sort of like build on top of that. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel again. So there's also like something you get back from being able to work with very, very bright people and sort of like leverage what they have written to actually build something even nicer, something even more beautiful. But I think in the Apache Software Foundation, and that's definitely not true for the whole open source world, but just for that segment of the open source world, it just makes commercial sense just as much as it is a pleasure. It's fun to work with other people.
With all pros also come cons. What threats do you foresee the internet will face in the future?
So there are various things, there are various pressures right now on open source and open standards just as much. Obviously there are like the various legal pressures. Within the Apache Software Foundation specifically, that's actually one of the things we spent most of our time doing in the past like 10 years, to basically learn how you deal with commercial pressure, financial pressure, legal pressure. So unlike a lot of other parts in open source, we've actually spent a lot of time on making sure that we've documented every line of code. So whenever you show us a line of code from the Apache Software Foundation, we can tell you who wrote it, who changed it, who they were employed by, and what basically gives us the right or the copyright or the trademark or whatever is needed to deal with that piece of code. But that's sort of like not everything. I think the biggest risk for open source is that a few of the large, very powerful industries or perhaps very powerful countries at one point will basically invent their own language and close that. So right now you can use the same web browser, the same web server anywhere on the internet. Whether you're in China, in America, in South Africa, it doesn't matter. Everything can talk to everything and everyone can basically using the same language there. And of course there is always a risk that at some point a certain area of the internet sort of like starts to speak their private language. And for example, if you look like very early on in the mobile phone world, if you look at, for example, at WAP, you saw examples of sort of like walled gardens, when suddenly like a part of the network wasn't sort of like connected to the rest of the internet. And I think that's one of the biggest threats for open source and open standard, that suddenly like a private standard like takes over.
If that would happen, what would in essence happen to the freedom and users worldwide on the internet?
Well, I think basically what it basically puts users in, and also like companies, in like a bit of a nasty position, because they may actually be forced to like take an either or choice. Do I talk to this crowd or do I talk to that crowd? So you basically get a certain level of balkanization. I think at the same time that's also the mitigator for that risk, because ultimately it makes no sense to split. I mean, if you're a company, you're not going to like talk to one half of the world at the expense of the other half of the world, because I mean, if you can talk to the whole world, that just makes more sense. I mean, there are like no two fax machine standards in the world. So I think gradually this sort of like internet sort of like open standards will sort of like win. And if you look at like what a lot of like European governments are doing right now, they're making open standards a very important part of their policy and very, very important part of the infrastructure more and more, because they realize there is this risk of balkanization, risk of sort of like splitting the world in two parts.
Where do you see Apache being in the next 5 years?
Apache is like really like two things. It's a community of people who basically work together on code. And it's not just people, it's also a community of companies who buy code, who sell code, who modify the code. So there's basically a whole ecosystem around Apache. That's one side of Apache. The other side of Apache is a legal guardian, basically a steward of code. And that part of Apache is rather boring. It basically deals with legal things, financial things, and basically it's a repository for code. I see that second part maturing a little bit more. We're learning a lot about legal threats, about financial threats to code, and basically improving our procedures. One of the recent things we started to do is something called the incubator. So when we accept a new project, because basically people come to us actually quite regular, like several times a month with new codes they want to make open source through the Apache Software Foundation. We basically are learning how to do that in a more efficient way, in a more secure way, basically in a way which allows big companies to sort of like use that software safe of lawsuits and other issues. So I see basically like a further improvement, refinement of that process, of the documentation you're doing there, of the legal vetting you're doing. On the ecosystem side of things, what we see right now today is we see some very, very large companies using Apache, like IBM, Sun, Microsoft, Oracle, BEA, the very big ones in this world, and we see a lot of like very small companies doing that. And I think what we're going to see in the next couple of years is that middle segment to actually like discover Apache and actually discover that's something, yeah, they can basically build better things for their customers with. So that's, I think, yeah, a new thing happening there. Apart from that, I'm not actually expecting, yeah, the Apple Card to be upset very much. It's sort of like it will slowly grow. It will actually, and that's actually something which may be a worry of things. Over the last like 10 years, we've seen Apache sort of like grow almost linearly. So we become bigger and bigger, whereas the internet grows exponentially. So as time goes on, there are actually like proportionally less people working on open source, basically as the internet grows. So we're basically lagging behind on the growth of the internet. I'm not sure what that means. I mean, that's like something for anthropologists to look at, but it's definitely an interesting fact that we're sort of like, even though we're one of the largest, if not the largest open source organization on the internet, we grow slower than the internet itself is growing.
Are there any tricks up the Apache's organization sleeve with regards to what's going to happen in the internet in the future?
Well, I think not tricks. There is one thing which is very much core to our existence, and that is that we really value that code, that basically work we've created lasts very long, like lasts 5 years, 10 years, 50 years. So one of the tricks we found in doing this, and actually making sure that code lives beyond sort of like the original creators, is actually making sure that there are like no personal babies, sort of like no personal things. So whenever we get an open source project contributed to us, we first look at it, is this actually like a product of one person or actually of a community? And is there like a long-term viable community with that? And very often that does mean that we try to make sure there is no like single individual who basically places his own interest like above that of the community. And we basically try to make sure that the product is one of the community as a whole.
The proliferation of mobile handheld devices, is that not perhaps going to cause an additional burden or strain onto the internet?
There are like many more like devices like coming onto the internet. Mobile phones is one good example. The other good example is basically light switches, TV sets. I mean, basically it goes on, and that's one of the reasons why like IPv6 is rather crucial to sort of like keep up with that sort of demand. But from the, let's say, Apache side, from the server side, no, that's actually a very natural thing to do, and obviously the systems will get larger and larger. But I wouldn't really expect any worries there. I do see in the Apache Software Foundation a lot of proliferation of a lot of addition of projects which are no longer dealing with just like talking to people. So, for example, web servers typically like just talk to individuals. They talk to people and they send them like a web page of a newspaper or of an advert or of some airline booking. What we do see, and that's actually something which is important for mobile devices for lots of other things, is this new semantic web where basically devices are talking to devices. So my phone actually like talks to my computer at home to actually figure out if something is scheduled or not. And that's actually a different type of software. And we see some of the more recent additions of the Apache Software Foundation actually be software of that type. So software which is no longer about like a computer talking to a human, but actually computers talking to each other to like deal with logistics, deal with planning, deal with various sort of like inter-business things.
In a nutshell, what exactly is IPv6 and how will it be seen in the next 5 years?
So right now on the internet we're using something called IPv4, and obviously there was like IPv1, 2, and 3, but they were never in popular use. IPv4 basically means there is every computer, every device, every phone on the internet sort of like has like a 12-digit phone number. What IPv6 does is actually really rather simple. Instead of like having a 12-digit phone number, we're basically going to like a 40, 50-digit phone number. That basically means there are more possible phone numbers, so there are basically more possible devices. And the reason for that is rather plain and simple. With the sort of 12 digits we have today, we're basically running out of digits. So that's basically why we're going to these longer phone numbers. The other thing which IPv6 does, which is a secondary important, is that it actually gives us a little bit of more security, a little bit of more confidentiality, and a little bit better privacy. But the main reason is we basically need like extra digits in the computer, their phone numbers.
When do you see IPv6 support coming in?
Right. So right now today, Apache is actually supported